So retro video game consoles, they're a big factor of the past when people usually talk about it, whether it be memories from the NES, SNES, Game Boy, Nintendo 64, even non-Nintendo consoles like the Sega Genesis and TurboGrafx-16. Most people have memories with old consoles, and those same people might want to replay those games, either for memory's sake or to introduce someone else to retro games. But how would you do that without all these cables and old consoles and these dinky cartridges? Well, Nintendo had a way, and it was the Nintendo Virtual Console, the virtual way to play old games from older consoles. I love the Nintendo Virtual Console, and you know what? I'm gonna talk about it for this Christmas season. Let's talk about the Nintendo Virtual Console, the gateway to retro games on modern Nintendo consoles, and one of my preferred ways to play retro games nowadays. We go all the way back into 2006, when the Nintendo Wii released. This is also where the Wii Virtual Console service started, and oh man, do I love this. The service had the usual offerings we're used to now from Nintendo, NES, SNES, but they also had N64 games too in the catalog. They even allowed other consoles into the mix too. Commodore 64, Sega Master System, even arcade games, which is very surprising to see nowadays. The emulators that played these games for the most part never really went outside of playing the game normally. There weren't really options to mess around with, no save states, button configurations, anything. There were always instructional manuals, but that's really it. Although the Virtual Console arcade titles were special, they allowed for button configurations and a load of special features. Still no save states though. What we had instead for the entire Virtual Console lineage was a thing called suspend points. If you were playing a Virtual Console game and exited out of it via the home button, you can come back and see exactly where you left off from last time. It's a feature where I'm honestly surprised not many emulators have nowadays. It's an amazing feature in an area where Virtual Console strived. The only games that didn't really support these were N64 and Neo Geo titles. Speaking of titles, I'm sure I keep saying this, but they had a plethora of console titles within this list. The list here is NES, SNES, N64, Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx-16, Neo Geo, Commodore 64, and finally arcade titles. That's 8 whole consoles and even more with arcade games. There were even MSX games over in Japan. Sure, there were computer games, so you'd need a keyboard for these, but just seeing computer games on a Wii of all things is just mind-blowing. If you wanted to try out retro games of all kinds, the Wii was the best option at the time. They had the iconics, stuff like the Super Mario Bros. NES games, the Genesis Sonic games, 5 of the Mega Man NES games, but they also had more obscure titles like Gapless, Boulder Dash, and Spin Master. The Wii, being a very big selling console, had a massive player base, so there's no doubt someone didn't at least pick up one of these titles. The service did begin to slow down eventually, however. Games weren't being added as often, even more games were being delisted for different kinds of reasons, like the Commodore 64 games being delisted in 2013. It was showing that while Virtual Console was a great idea, and still is now, they couldn't keep it afloat on the Wii forever. So that's why they transferred it over to other consoles, starting with the Nintendo 3DS, where they would show more handheld appreciation rather than consoles on the service. The Nintendo 3DS released in 2011, and the eShop it started a few months later via a system update in June. What? After that weird eShop launch, the Virtual Console service finally started with NES, Game Boy, and Game Boy Color games. While the NES games may seem like nothing special compared to the Wii, the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games are a massive addition to the library, since they were never really playable other than on the original handhelds or the GBA with its backwards compatibility. Speaking of the GBA, since Nintendo had to make a price cut for the 3DS in order to sell it and avoid it from bombing more quickly, they thought of giving early owners of the 3DS 20 free retro games. 10 NES, 10 GBA games, all of which were branded under the Ambassador program. The NES games eventually saw the light of day on the eShop, but the GBA games were never released anywhere else but the Ambassador program. And every time someone asked about GBA on the 3DS, they gave the answer, "Oh, it's so hard to emulate GBA games on the 3DS." Keep this in mind for later. Sega Game Gear games eventually hit the store in 2012, which is amazing. Sure, the Game Gear now is seen as a not great console with not great games, but it's still cool to replay these games on the 3DS regardless. M2 developed the emulator seen here. They were responsible for many retro ports on many consoles back in the day. They also worked with Nintendo on the Virtual Console, but that's not until a future segment, so we'll move on. TurboGrafx 16 games made it onto 3DS Virtual Console in 2013, MSX games as well sometime in the 3DS's life. They were only both available in Japan though, sadly, which doesn't make sense at all given TG16 games were on the Wii in the US and thriving there. But finally, the last console in the 3DS Virtual Console lineup happened in 2016. Super Nintendo games, and they were only for the new 3DS. What? Yeah, the reason they gave for Super Nintendo games never being available on the old 3DS was the CPU of the old 3DS cannot handle SNES games. I don't know if this is a dumb reason or a stupid reason, you tell me. Whatever, they played well on the 3DS just like every other Virtual Console title, and they even had an option for a pixel perfect aspect ratio, or the patented Virtual Console aspect ratio. It was actually also there on the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games too, but you had to press start while booting those up for that. I think the Super Nintendo version of this option is much easier. But after all in that, they released the Pokemon Game Boy and Game Boy Color games in 2016 to 2018. Wow, what a lame way to go out. The Virtual Console service on 3DS is actually really good. Its demise was kinda just Nintendo not really supporting it other than GB and GBC games, and gatekeeping the SNES games to the new 3DS. The NES games were nothing new. I think people mostly bought them because, oh, I can play these games portably now. But other than that, the service was pretty great, and I'm glad they did it on the 3DS. Seeing Game Boy and Game Boy Color games finally make a return was so damn cool. Same for Game Gear and even TurboGrafx 16, at least in Japan. Now we have to move on to the third and final console the Virtual Console service appeared on, the Nintendo Wii U. The Wii U, by all means, was a big failure. It didn't sell well, the advertising was awful. There's a reason nearly every single Wii U exclusive title has gone onto other platforms like the Switch and the PS4. But it did have great games, and of course the main point I'm here for that's not on the Switch, the Virtual Console service. The Wii U launched with an event about the Famicom that was about the retro Famicom titles, but it wasn't labeled under the Virtual Console line, it was just a cute little event and nothing more. The actual launch of the Virtual Console service on Wii U began a little while after that event, however, and they announced NES and SNES games at the start of the service. And honestly, this feels really lame, I'm sorry. The magic and surprise for these games vanished at this point in time. People weren't really nostalgic over the NES and SNES anymore. They didn't even release that many exclusive titles on the service. Most if not all of them are from the Wii Virtual Console. There's nothing really new for these consoles. But of course this was just the beginning of the service on Wii U. While Nintendo had more things planned for this, I think this was a pretty lackluster launch for it on Wii U. N64 games would see a return on Wii U, of course, since they had them on the Wii, but they're usually considered the worst versions to play these games on, mainly due to the input lag and the insane dark filter placed on these. They did this to combat seizures from happening to their customers, and while I do commend them for being safe about their customers, I think there should have been an option to take this filter off so I can see the damn game. GBA games made it onto the Wii U Virtual Console service, a surprisingly weird but very welcome addition. Kinda weird they didn't make GBA games available on the 3DS, yet they did on the Wii U, but hey, I'm not a multi-million-dollar company, I don't know what I'm saying. And finally, the last Nintendo console added to the Virtual Console service on Wii U, the Nintendo DS. In my opinion, this is genuinely the best part about Virtual Console on Wii U, and arguably one of the only reasons you should get a Wii U nowadays. These games play wonderfully on the Wii U, and they make perfect sense to be on here due to the gamepad and TV setup. The touchscreen functionalities aren't lost due to the gamepad, and the game can display correctly due to the TV. A win-win for both aspects. Sure, if you play the button-type DS games, it might feel a bit weird playing them on the gamepad, but it's better than nothing, honestly. I love DS games on the Wii U, and I'm glad Nintendo added them to the Virtual Console service. That's the end of the service's support for Nintendo. What about the other consoles? Wait a minute, what other consoles? Yeah, all that appeared on Wii U Virtual Console after what Nintendo did were TurboGrafx 16 games and nothing else, aside from MSX games in Japan only, of course. I'm kinda both shocked and not so shocked at the same time that other companies didn't put their systems on the Wii U Virtual Console. Sega could have returned with the Master System and Genesis, maybe even arcade and Commodore 64 titles could have returned as well. But it is what it is. The Wii U did sell poorly, so maybe that's what turned companies away. I believe this is the point where Nintendo finally realized that the Virtual Console brand was dead. It peaked with the Wii, succeeded with the 3DS, and slowly died with the Wii U. The Switch would release in 2017 to no mention or anything hinting at a Virtual Console selection returning. Instead, they placed the retro titles on the Switch Online subscription service. And I believe that's a topic I will talk about for another day. Overall, the Virtual Console service was a really good thing to happen throughout the years. It got people into retro gaming with the Wii, it brought retro console games onto handhelds with the 3DS, and the Wii U brought handhelds to consoles. That's something, right? No matter which console you got Virtual Console titles from, I think we can all agree that Virtual Console was great. The many memories people have made with the Virtual Console service is something I feel like Nintendo Switch Online can't really replicate. Sure, NSO isn't really bad, but it's still not the same, honestly. Virtual Console may be dead, but we still remember it, love it, and talk about it to this day. I'm Necro, this has been a very seasonal review about Virtual Console on Nintendo consoles. See you next time. Hey guys, Necro here. If you've watched the video to this point, I just want to say that I'm surprised with how this channel has grown from its inception. Almost 10 videos and 50 subscribers. I find that really impressive. I want to thank you all who have subscribed and enjoyed my content from the beginning to now. I know I may be slowing down a bit in the feed, but trust me, by next year I hope to bring more content to y'all. Starting with a small update video in January next year. Merry Christmas to all, and here's to a very jolly new year. Thank you.